Cleaning lady was caring for Millionaire's mother without getting paid for it. When he found out, Emily Wilson stopped in front of the door at the end of the mansion's hallway, holding the bucket of cleaning supplies tightly. It was her third month working at the Thompson family's home, a wealthy New York family, and she still felt there was something strange about that room she had never cleaned. When she heard a faint moan coming from inside, her heart raced. Without thinking twice, she slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. What she saw took her breath away. An elderly woman with white hair was lying on the cold floor, shivering and clearly weak. Her clothes were dirty, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Emily dropped everything and ran to her. "My God, are you all right, ma'am?" she whispered, helping the elderly woman sit up. The woman looked up with difficulty, as if she couldn't believe someone had appeared. Who are you?" she murmured hoarsely. "I'm Emily. I work here cleaning. Are you Mr. Richard's mother?" The elderly woman nodded slowly, and Emily felt her chest tighten. How was it possible that the homeowner's mother was in such a state? "I'll get you some water," said Emily, but the woman grabbed her arm with a strength she didn't seem to have. "No, don't tell anyone you saw me, please." Emily was confused, but something in the woman's desperate look made her agree. After helping her back to bed, she left the room with 1,000 questions in her head. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the scene she had witnessed and how the woman seemed abandoned. The next day, when she arrived for work, she couldn't resist. She secretly prepared a hot soup in the kitchen and brought it to the room. "I brought you something to eat," she said softly, entering carefully. Mrs. Elizabeth, as she found out her name was, had tears in her eyes. "It's been so long since someone has done this for me," she murmured, accepting the plate with trembling hands. Emily sat on the edge of the bed and watched the woman eat slowly, as if every spoonful was precious. "Why are you locked up in here?" she asked gently. Mrs. Elizabeth stopped eating and looked toward the window. "My son, he says it's for my own good, that I'm not right in the head and need to stay quiet. But I know it's not true, Emily. I know." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. From that day on, Emily began a secret routine. During her lunch break, she would go up to Mrs. Elizabeth's room with food hidden in a bag. They talked about life, and Emily realized the woman was perfectly lucid and very intelligent. "You know, Emily, before being locked up here, I managed several charities. My late husband always said our wealth was only worth something if it helped other people," Mrs. Elizabeth told her one afternoon. "What happened? Why did you stop?" "When my husband passed 2 years ago, Richard took over the business. He said I was spending too much money on people who didn't deserve it, and that I needed to stop. We started arguing a lot about it." Emily noticed the woman's eyes lit up when she talked about the past, but filled with sadness when she mentioned her son. "One day I woke up, and the door was locked from the outside. Richard said I had outbursts, that I didn't remember things. But it's a lie, Emily. I remember everything." For 2 weeks, Emily continued to care for Mrs. Elizabeth in secret. She brought not only food, but also books she found around the house, helped the woman bathe, and even cut her hair, which had grown very long. The transformation was impressive. Mrs. Elizabeth regained color in her face, her eyes recovered their sparkle, and she could walk around the room without difficulty. That was when everything began to fall apart. David Wilson, the accountant at Richard's company, noticed in the monthly reports that the household food expenses had increased significantly. He was a meticulous man who paid attention to every penny, and that variation bothered him. "Emily, I need to speak with you," he said one Thursday morning when she was cleaning the office. She felt her stomach turn to ice but tried to stay calm. "Yes, Mr. David? I'm seeing here that the food expenses have increased a lot this month. Do you know anything about it?" Emily turned red. She didn't know how to lie, and David noticed immediately. I sometimes eat here at lunch. Maybe that's it," she stammered. "Emily, you're hiding something. I'll have to report these extra expenses to Mr. Richard." That afternoon, when Emily went upstairs to see Mrs. Elizabeth, she was visibly worried. "What's wrong, my dear? asked the lady who had already learned to read the young woman's expressions. I think they found out I've been bringing food to you. The accountant noticed the increase in expenses. Mrs. Elizabeth held Emily's hands. I knew this day would come. Emily, you've done so much for me, but I can't let you lose your job because of me. Don't worry, Mrs. Elizabeth. I'll figure something out. But the next day, Richard Thompson was waiting for Emily at the entrance of the mansion. He was a tall, 45-year-old man, always well-dressed and with an air of superiority that bothered all the employees. Emily, I need to speak with you. Now. She followed him to the office, her legs feeling weak. David told me about the extra food expenses, and I did some investigating. I found out you've been taking food somewhere. I want to know to whom. Emily took a deep breath. She knew it was no use lying. Mr. Richard, I found Mrs. Elizabeth in the room at the end of the hallway. She was starving and... My mother, he shouted, rising from his chair. You went into my mother's room. She was unwell, sir, very weak and... My mother is sick, Emily. She has serious mental problems. The doctors recommended she stay in isolation on a controlled diet. You may have harmed her entire treatment. Emily felt he wasn't telling the truth. Mrs. Elizabeth was perfectly sane. But, sir, she talks normally. She remembers everything. You're not a doctor to judge that. Richard slammed his fist on the table. I'm very disappointed. I thought I could trust you. It was at that moment they heard footsteps in the hallway. To both their astonishment, Mrs. Elizabeth appeared at the office door. She stood with a straight posture, her hair neatly styled as Emily had cut it, and a determined look that Richard hadn't seen in months. Richard, we need to talk, she said in a firm voice. Her son turned pale. Mother, how did you get out of your room? The door was locked. Emily gave me a spare key last week, and before you ask, no, I'm not having any breakdown. I'm perfectly well and lucid. Richard looked at Emily angrily. You gave a key to my mother? This is unacceptable. Son, Emily saved my life, said Mrs. Elizabeth, walking over to stand beside the young woman. If it weren't for her, I would have... Well, I don't even want to think about it. Mother, you don't understand. The doctors said that... What doctors, Richard? It's been months since any doctor has examined me. The only person who's spoken to me in the past few weeks has been Emily. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, while Mrs. Elizabeth seemed stronger and more determined than she had been in a long time. Emily, said Mrs. Elizabeth, turning to the young woman, I want you to know that I will never forget what you did for me, and I won't let my son fire you for being kind. Mother, this isn't your business. Emily violated the house rules and... This is my house too, Richard, exclaimed Mrs. Elizabeth with a force in her voice that startled them both. And Emily is an exemplary employee. If she leaves, I leave too. The silence that followed was tense. Richard ran his hand through his hair, clearly lost about how to handle the situation. It was then that the doorbell rang. David entered the office with a folder in his hand and stopped when he saw Mrs. Elizabeth. Mrs. Elizabeth? Are you... better? I'm great, David. And you? How are you? How is your daughter? The last time we spoke, she was taking her medical school entrance exams. David was surprised by Mrs. Elizabeth's detailed memory. She passed, Mrs. Elizabeth. She started the course last month. How wonderful. I always knew she would make it. Richard watched the interaction with growing discomfort. It was impossible to deny that his mother was perfectly well. David, said Richard, trying to regain control of the situation, did you bring the documents I asked for? Yes, sir. The medical reports on Mrs. Elizabeth's mental state. Mrs. Elizabeth's eyes widened. What reports? Richard, what doctor examined me? David opened the folder and began to read. According to Dr. Thomas Mitchell, patient Elizabeth Thompson shows signs of advanced senile dementia, with episodes of mental confusion and memory loss. Isolation and constant supervision are recommended. That's a lie, exclaimed Mrs. Elizabeth. I've never seen this Dr. Thomas in my life. Emily, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Mr. Richard, I'm sorry, but Mrs. Elizabeth is right. In these last few days, she told me details about her entire life, remembered names of people she hadn't seen in years. She has no memory problems. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard was turning red with anger. Emily, you're not qualified to assess my mother's mental state. And as for you, he said, turning to Mrs. Elizabeth, you're being manipulated by a self-serving employee. Emily felt as if she had been slapped in the face. Self-serving? Mr. Richard, I never asked Mrs. Elizabeth for anything. I only offered food and companionship. Of course, to later ask for money, right? To take advantage of a vulnerable lady. Enough, shouted Mrs. Elizabeth, stomping her foot on the floor. Richard Thompson, you're behaving in a way that would shame your father. The name of her deceased husband made Richard fall silent instantly. Emily took care of me without asking for anything in return. She gave me affection when I needed it most, made me remember that I'm still a person who matters, and you locked me up as if I were an animal. Tears began to stream down Mrs. Elizabeth's face, but she didn't stop speaking. You know what's the saddest part, son? You've become exactly what your father despised most, a person who only thinks about money and forgets about humanity. David, who was watching everything with growing discomfort, cleared his throat. Mr. Richard, perhaps it's better if I come back another day. No, David, stay, said Mrs. Elizabeth. I want you to be a witness to what's happening here. At that moment, they heard voices coming from the garden. It was Robert, the gardener, talking to someone. Emily, said Mrs. Elizabeth, could you call Robert here? I'm sure he has interesting things to tell. Richard tried to protest, but Emily had already left. She returned a few minutes later with Robert, a 60-year-old man who had worked at the house for over a decade. Robert, said Mrs. Elizabeth, I need you to tell the truth about what you've seen these past few months. The gardener looked nervously at Richard, who signaled for him not to say anything. But Mrs. Elizabeth approached him. Robert, how many years have you known me? 15 years, Mrs. Elizabeth. And have I ever lied to you or treated you badly? Never, ma'am. You've always been very good to me. Then help me now. What did you see? Robert took a deep breath and began to speak, still avoiding looking at Richard. I saw several times when Mr. Richard moved you to another room, always when there were visitors in the house, and I also saw when he had that special lock installed on the door. What lock? Asked David. One that only opens from the outside, murmured Robert. The silence that followed was devastating. Richard was speechless at the revelation. Robert, continued Mrs. Elizabeth, did you see anything else? He looked at Richard, who shook his head no. I can't say more, Mrs. Elizabeth. I need my job. No one is going to lose their job, assured Mrs. Elizabeth. Robert, please. The gardener sighed deeply. I saw when you screamed for help and no one could do anything. I also saw when you went days without eating properly, and... He hesitated. And I saw Mr. Richard giving instructions to the cook to prepare only the basics for you. Emily felt her chest tighten. The situation was much worse than she had imagined. Does Mrs. Margaret also know about all this? She asked. The cook, said Robert. Of course she knows. She was the one who told me she couldn't stand seeing you go hungry anymore, but she was afraid of losing her job. Richard finally exploded. Enough! All of you are plotting against me. Robert, you're fired. Emily, you too. And don't think you'll get any severance pay. Son, exclaimed Mrs. Elizabeth. Don't call me son. You're not my mother anymore. A real mother wouldn't do this to me. Richard's words echoed through the office like gunshots. Mrs. Elizabeth staggered and Emily held her by the arm. Richard, said Mrs. Elizabeth with a trembling voice, your father must be turning in his grave hearing you speak like that. Don't mention my father. He wouldn't understand business as it is today. Business? Mrs. Elizabeth laughed bitterly. Do you think your father built this company thinking only about money? He always said that wealth without purpose is a curse. Cheap philosophy doesn't pay the bills. Doesn't pay the bills. Mrs. Elizabeth straightened up. showing a strength that surprised everyone. "Richard, do you know how much money this family has? Do you know we could live for 3 generations without working a single day?" David confirmed with a nod. "It's true, Mr. Richard. The family assets are substantial." "Then why were you trying to give everything away to strangers?" shouted Richard. "I wasn't giving everything away," Mrs. Elizabeth shouted back, startling everyone. "I wanted to use a small part of our fortune to help people in need, like we've always done." Emily realized they had reached the heart of the matter. The fight wasn't about Mrs. Elizabeth's mental state, but about money and control. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Emily softly, "how much money did you want to use for the social projects?" 10% of the annual income," replied Mrs. Elizabeth. "Just the interest, Emily. I wouldn't even touch the principal." David did some quick calculations in his head and murmured, "It would be less than we spend on property maintenance." Richard looked at the accountant angrily. "David, are you against me too?" "Mr. Richard, I just do the math. And the math shows that Mrs. Elizabeth is proposing to use a very small amount compared to the total assets." "Small? Small?" Richard was losing control. "You don't understand anything about financial responsibility." That's when Mrs. Margaret, the cook, appeared at the door carrying a tray. "Sorry to interrupt, but I brought a snack for—" She stopped when she saw all the commotion. "What's going on here?" "Mrs. Margaret," said Mrs. Elizabeth, "come closer. I need to ask you something." The cook, a sturdy 55-year-old woman, approached hesitantly. "Richard told me you were receiving special instructions about my meals. Is that true?" Mrs. Margaret looked nervously at Richard, then at Mrs. Elizabeth. I was just following orders." "What orders were those?" "Mr. Richard said you were sick and couldn't eat much, that I could only send basic food, a piece of bread, a fruit, sometimes a thin soup." "And you thought that was normal?" Mrs. Margaret began to cry. "I didn't think it was normal, Mrs. Elizabeth. You've always been so good to me. You always ate well, but I needed the job. I have 3 grandchildren to raise after my daughter passed away." Mrs. Elizabeth approached the cook and held her hands. "Margaret, you're not at fault for anything. I understand your situation perfectly." Richard tried to speak, but Mrs. Elizabeth raised her hand to silence him. "I want all of you to know one thing. From today on, no one will be mistreated in this house anymore, and no one will lose their job for telling the truth." "Mother, you can't make these decisions," said Richard. "I can't?" Mrs. Elizabeth smiled grimly. "David, did you only bring the medical reports, or did you bring all the documents I asked for?" David hesitated, looking between mother and son. I brought everything, Mrs. Elizabeth." "Then take out of the briefcase the papers for the power of attorney my late husband left me." Richard's face turned white. "What power of attorney?" David opened the briefcase with trembling hands and pulled out a document. He began to read. "Power of attorney granted by William Thompson to his wife Elizabeth Thompson, conferring general powers for the administration of all family assets and businesses, valid regardless of the grantee's marital or health status." "That's not valid anymore," shouted Richard. "My father died 2 years ago." "Richard," said David softly, "powers of attorney like this remain valid after the grantor's death, especially when notarized. And this one was." Emily didn't fully understand the legal implications, but she realized that Mrs. Elizabeth had just completely turned the tables. "What does this mean exactly?" asked Emily. "It means," said Mrs. Elizabeth, with a smile that mixed sadness and determination, "that I have the legal authority to make any decision regarding this family's assets, including this house and the company." Richard slumped into a chair, his face in his hands. "Mother, I didn't know about this power of attorney." "Of course you didn't. Because if you had, you would have never locked me in that room." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the grandfather clock. Everyone present processed the implications of what had just been revealed. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Emily hesitantly, "what are you going to do now?" Mrs. Elizabeth looked at each person in the office: Emily, David, Robert, Mrs. Margaret, and finally, her son. "What I'm going to do, Emily, is show my son that there are better ways to resolve conflicts than locking people in rooms. She walked over to Richard and knelt in front of the chair where he was sitting. Son, look at me. Richard lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red. Richard, I need to understand one thing. Why did you do this to me? Why did it come to this? He choked up. I thought you had lost your mind after Dad died. You wanted to give money to everyone, talked about selling properties to help strangers, and that was a reason to lock me up? I was afraid, Mother, afraid that you would squander everything Dad built, afraid that we would go bankrupt because of your humanitarian projects. Mrs. Elizabeth sighed deeply. Richard, did you really believe that, or were you just afraid of losing control over the money? The question hung in the air. Richard took his time to answer. Maybe it was a bit of both. Emily watched the conversation with a heavy heart. She could see the suffering of both mother and son. Mr. Richard, said Emily timidly, may I ask a question? He nodded without raising his eyes. Did you visit Mrs. Elizabeth in her room? Once a week, he murmured. And how did she seem to you? Confused, lost. Sometimes she didn't even recognize me. Mrs. Elizabeth held her son's face in her hands. Son, do you know why I seemed confused? Because of the illness? No, Richard, because I was dying of sadness. When the person we love most in the world abandons us, when we become isolated from everything and everyone, the soul withers. I wasn't sick. I was broken inside. Tears began to stream down Richard's face. Mother, I didn't know. How could you know? You never asked what I felt. You just assumed I was crazy. Emily felt she needed to say something. Mrs. Elizabeth, may I tell Mr. Richard how you are now? Mrs. Elizabeth nodded. Mr. Richard, said Emily, your mother has no mental problems. She remembers details from decades ago, makes plans for the future, worries about other people. She was just sad and abandoned. Is it true? Richard asked his mother. Completely true. Richard, I was never crazy. I was just lost and afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that my only son had become a person I no longer recognized. Richard began to cry openly. Mother, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. I know you are, son, but I'm sorry is not enough. We need to rebuild our relationship from the beginning. David, who had remained silent, cleared his throat. Mrs. Elizabeth, Mr. Richard, perhaps I should let you talk in private. No, David, said Mrs. Elizabeth. I want everyone to stay. You are part of this family too, and deserve to know how we will move forward. She stood up and began to walk around the room. First, Richard, you will remove all the special locks from my door and I will move freely around my house again. Yes, Mother. Second, Emily will be promoted to my personal assistant. I no longer want her to be treated as a simple cleaner. Emily's eyes widened. Mrs. Elizabeth, No protests, Emily. You saved my life and deserve to be recognized for it. Third, continued Mrs. Elizabeth, we will indeed implement the social projects I planned, but not in the way I wanted before. Richard will participate in all decisions, and together we will find ways to help people without compromising the company. Richard raised his head. You still want to work with me? Of course I do. You are my son. We both made mistakes, Richard. I was too stubborn and you were too rigid, but that doesn't mean we can't start over. And fourth, said Mrs. Elizabeth, looking at all the employees, Margaret, Robert, and Emily. You will receive significant salary increases, and I want you to know that you can always count on me for anything. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Margaret began to cry with emotion. Mrs. Elizabeth, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Margaret. You remained loyal to me even when it was dangerous. That is priceless. Robert, who had remained silent in the corner of the room, finally spoke. Mrs. Elizabeth, may I say something? Of course, Robert. You have always been very good to all of us. Even when Mr. Richard gave orders not to speak with you, I always wanted to help, but I was afraid. I understand perfectly, Robert. You have a family to support. That's what I wanted to talk about, said Robert. You always knew about our problems, always helped when someone was going through a hard time. The only person who didn't see this was Mr. Richard. Richard looked at the gardener, surprised. What do you mean? Sir, your mother paid for my wife's hospital bills, helped Margaret's daughter study, gave money for Emily to send to her family back home. She always helped everyone. Emily nodded. It's true, Mr. Richard. In my first month working here, my father got sick and needed expensive medicine. Mrs. Elizabeth found out and gave me the money without me even asking. You never told me this, said Richard, because Mrs. Elizabeth always asked us not to tell, explained Margaret. She said helping people should be discreet. Richard ran his hand through his hair, clearly processing all this information. Mother, I really didn't know this side of you. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, son. You were so worried about numbers and spreadsheets that you forgot to pay attention to people. Mrs. Elizabeth, said Emily, may I suggest something? Of course, dear. What if Mr. Richard spent an afternoon with you, talking, getting to know your projects better? Maybe he would understand your motivations better. Mrs. Elizabeth smiled. Emily, you're right. Richard, do you accept the invitation? He nodded, still emotional. I accept, Mother. I really want to understand all this better. Then it's settled. But first, we have to resolve something important. What? You said you consulted doctors about my mental state. I want to meet this Dr. Thomas Mitchell who signed the reports. David flipped through the papers. Actually, Mrs. Elizabeth, I have to confess something. This Dr. Thomas doesn't exist. Everyone fell silent. What do you mean he doesn't exist? Asked Richard. Mr. Richard, when you asked me to provide medical reports about Mrs. Elizabeth, I tried to explain that she would need to be examined first. You said there was no time, and that I should figure it out. And you? I hired a doctor who agreed to sign the reports without examining the patient, but I used a fake name on the documents to protect his identity. Mrs. Elizabeth laughed ironically. So the reports are completely fake? Completely, admitted David, clearly ashamed. Richard, said Mrs. Elizabeth, turning to her son, did you really believe I was crazy, or did you know the reports were fake? Richard turned red. I knew they weren't completely true, but I needed some legal document to lock me up, Mrs. Elizabeth finished. To protect our family, said Richard desperately. Protect from what, son? From a 72-year-old woman who wanted to use a small part of the family fortune to help other people? The silence that followed was broken by Emily. Excuse me, but may I make an observation? Everyone looked at her. Mr. Richard, are you afraid of running out of money? Of course not. Our family has enough resources for several generations. Then why were you so worried about Mrs. Elizabeth's projects? Richard hesitated before answering. Because my father always told me to protect the family's assets above all else. Richard, said Mrs. Elizabeth softly, your father never said that. He always said the opposite, that money was only worth something if it was used for good. But he also told me to take care of the business. Taking care of the business doesn't mean accumulating money without purpose, son. It means using wealth wisely. Emily had an idea. Mrs. Elizabeth, do you still have the notes for the social projects you were planning? I have them all in my mind. Why? How about showing Mr. Richard exactly what you plan to do, with numbers, spreadsheets, everything detailed? Mrs. Elizabeth clapped her hands. Excellent idea. David, do you have time now to help me put together a presentation? Of course, Mrs. Elizabeth. Richard, do you want to see how your crazy mother planned to squander the family fortune? He nodded, curious despite himself. Over the next 2 hours, Mrs. Elizabeth, with the help of David and Emily, put together a detailed presentation of her social projects. The numbers were impressive and impressively conservative. Look, explained Mrs. Elizabeth, I wanted to create a social assistance fund that would use only the investment returns, never the principal capital. The fund would help families in vulnerable situations, finance studies for underprivileged youth, and maintain a community center. And how much would that cost per year? Asked Richard. David did the calculations. About $2.5 million annually. And our annual income is how much? Approximately $45 million. Richard fell silent, clearly embarrassed. Mum, that's less than 6% of our annual income. Exactly. And look here, said Mrs. Elizabeth, pointing to other notes. I also plan to expand some of the family businesses to generate more jobs in the region. That would increase our income and help the community at the same time. Why didn't you ever show me this before? Because you never wanted to see, Richard. Whenever I tried to talk about the projects, you said you were too busy or changed the subject. Emily watched the interaction between mother and son with a growing sense of hope. She could see that Richard was genuinely surprised by the professionalism and sensibility of his mother's plans. Mum, said Richard after a long silence, I was a complete idiot. You weren't an idiot, son. You were afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of disappointing your father, afraid of not being able to handle everything alone. That's true, admitted Richard. After Dad died, I felt lost. He always made the important decisions, and suddenly everything was on my shoulders. And instead of asking me for help, you decided to push me away, because I thought you wouldn't understand modern business. Mrs. Elizabeth laughed. Son, I ran charities for 30 years. Dealing with budgets, people and projects is nothing new to me. I know that now, said Richard, looking at her notes. Your plans are better than many projects I see at the company. That's because they were made with love, not just ambition. Margaret, who had remained quiet preparing a snack, approached the group. Mrs. Elizabeth, may I say something? Of course, Margaret. I've worked in this house for a very long time. I saw how you and Mr. William always took care of everyone. When Mr. William passed away, we were all worried, not just for you, but for Mr. Richard too. Why? Because we knew he wasn't prepared to handle everything alone, but instead of asking for help, he closed himself off. He became more serious, more rigid. Margaret is right, said Robert. Mr. Richard changed a lot after his father left. He became more distant from everyone, including you. Richard reflected on the employee's words. You're right, I really did change, but it was because I felt I had to be strong, that I had to protect our family from everything. Son, said Mrs. Elizabeth, strength isn't closing your heart. Strength is having the courage to be vulnerable when necessary. Like Emily did, added David, who had observed everything in silence. She risked her job to take care of Mrs. Elizabeth. That's true courage. Emily blushed at the compliment. I only did what was right. No, Emily, said Mrs. Elizabeth, you did more than right. You did what was necessary, even knowing the risks. Mother, said Richard, may I ask a personal question? Of course. Do you forgive me? Mrs. Elizabeth approached her son and held his hands. Richard, I've already forgiven you. Since the first day locked in that room, I knew you were acting out of fear, not malice. Even after everything I did, especially after everything you did, because now I understand that you were suffering too. Richard hugged his mother for the first time in months. Thank you, Mother. I promise I will never close my heart to you again. And I promise we will work together from now on. No secrets, no distrust. Emily wiped away a tear that insisted on escaping. It was impossible not to be moved seeing that reconciliation. Mrs. Elizabeth, said Emily, may I suggest something? Always, dear. How about we start the social projects with something small, so Mr. Richard can see how it works in practice? Great idea. Richard, what do you think? I think it's perfect. But I want to be involved in everything. I want to understand how you think, how you plan things. Then let's start right here, with the people in this house, said Mrs. Elizabeth, looking at Margaret, Robert, David, and Emily. How so? Asked Margaret. We'll create an employee assistance fund. You will have access to better health plans, your children will have scholarships, and any family emergency will be covered by the company. Robert was emotional. Mrs. Elizabeth, that's wonderful. It's not just me, Robert. It's a decision made by Richard and me together. Richard nodded. Mom is right. And Emily, you will be responsible for coordinating this program. Me? Emily's eyes widened. but I have no experience with that." "Yes, you do," said Mrs. Elizabeth. "You coordinated my care for weeks, managed to gain everyone's trust and have a generous heart. Those are the most important qualifications. But I would need to study, learn, and you will learn," said Richard. "We'll arrange courses, training, everything that's necessary." David smiled. "May I suggest that Emily take a business administration course? I have contacts at some universities." "Excellent idea," agreed Mrs. Elizabeth. Emily had tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank us," said Richard. "We are the ones who need to thank you. If it weren't for you, I would have lost my mother forever." "Not just lost me," corrected Mrs. Elizabeth. "Richard, you would have lost yourself too. You were turning into someone who wasn't you." "That's true, and I'm lucky it's not too late to change." Margaret timidly raised her hand. "May I make a suggestion?" "Of course, Margaret," encouraged Mrs. Elizabeth. "How about we have a special dinner tonight to celebrate the family being together again?" "Margaret, that's the best idea of the day," exclaimed Mrs. Elizabeth. "But on one condition. We all cook together." "You want to cook?" asked Margaret, surprised. "I do. It's been so long since I've cooked. And Richard, you're going to help me." "Mother, I don't know how to cook." "Then it's time to learn. Emily, you're joining too. And Robert, you can pick fresh vegetables from the garden. David, you're in charge of the music." That afternoon, the Thompson mansion transformed. For the first time in years, it was full of life, laughter, and lively conversations. Mrs. Elizabeth moved freely around the house. Richard tried to learn how to chop vegetables under Margaret's guidance. Emily set the table, and Robert brought fresh flowers from the garden. During dinner preparations, Mrs. Elizabeth pulled Emily aside for a private conversation on the porch. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something important." "Yes, Mrs. Elizabeth." "You saved more than just my life. You saved my family, and I just—" "No, let me finish," Mrs. Elizabeth interrupted gently. "You could have ignored me when you found me in that room. You could have decided it wasn't your problem. But you chose to care about a stranger. You were never a stranger to me." "Why? You barely knew me." Emily thought for a moment before answering. "Because I saw in your eyes the same sadness I saw in my grandmother when she was left alone. And I thought, if it were my grandmother, I would want someone to take care of her." Mrs. Elizabeth held Emily's hands. "Your grandmother is very lucky to have a granddaughter like you." "Was. She passed away last year." "Oh dear, I'm so sorry." "That's why taking care of you was so important to me. It was like I could take care of my grandmother one last time." Mrs. Elizabeth hugged Emily tightly. "Now I understand why we connected so quickly. You have the soul of someone who understands the value of elderly people. My grandmother always said that the elderly carry the world's history, that we should honor them and learn from them." "Your grandmother was a wise woman." They stayed silent for a few minutes, watching the movement in the house. Richard was trying to help Margaret in the kitchen and was asking questions about every ingredient. David was organizing a playlist on the stereo. Robert was arranging the flowers on the dining table. "Mrs. Elizabeth," said Emily, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you really forgive me for entering your room without permission?" Mrs. Elizabeth laughed. "Emily, are you joking? You saved me. How can I forgive someone for something that was a blessing? It's just that sometimes I think I invaded your privacy. Honey, you gave me back my life. If that's an invasion of privacy, then may more people invade." They laughed together, and Emily felt a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. "Mrs. Elizabeth, can I confess something? Anything. I was almost giving up working here, not because I didn't like it, but because I felt I wasn't making a difference in anyone's life. And now? Now I feel I've found my purpose." "Your purpose?" "Taking care of people, making a difference in their lives, even if it's small." Mrs. Elizabeth smiled. "Emily, you're 28 years old and you've already discovered your life's purpose. Many people live for decades without discovering that. Did you always know what yours was? Always. Since I was young, I knew I wanted to use my family's resources to help others. It just took some time to be able to do it the right way." "How did you meet your husband?" "Oh, that's an interesting story." Mrs. Elizabeth perked up. "I was organizing a food drive for families in need. William showed up at the event wanting to help, but not as a donor. He wanted to work as a volunteer. Really? Completely? He said he had plenty of money, but that he needed to better understand what life was like for those who had nothing. And you fell in love working together? We fell in love seeing in each other the same passion for helping people. William always said he married me because I taught him that wealth without purpose is an empty life. Emily sighed. What a beautiful story. And Mr. Richard, was he like that as a child? Richard was a very sensitive child. He was always worried about whether the house staff were okay if they needed anything. When he turned 10, he asked for his birthday present that we throw a party for all the underprivileged children in the area. What changed then? Mrs. Elizabeth became thoughtful. I think the pressure of taking over the family business. William always said that Richard would be the heir, that he needed to be strong and responsible. Maybe Richard interpreted that as being cold and calculating. But does he still have that sensitive heart? Definitely. You saw how he cried today. He had just forgotten how to access that part of himself. At that moment, Richard appeared on the veranda. Mom, Emily, come. Dinner is almost ready and Margaret said she needs both of your approval before serving. They went back inside the house, where the delicious aroma of home-cooked food filled every room. The table was beautifully set, with Robert's flowers in the center and candles that David had found in some cabinet. Wow, said Margaret, wiping her hands on her apron. I've never cooked so happily in my life. Having everyone together in the kitchen was wonderful. For me too, said Richard. I discovered that cooking is really relaxing. And did you discover anything else? Asked Mrs. Elizabeth with a mischievous smile. I discovered that our cook is an artist. Margaret, you could teach cooking classes. Mr. Richard, that's an idea. Margaret got excited. I've always dreamed of teaching other people how to cook. Then let's include that in our social projects, said Mrs. Elizabeth. Cooking classes for the community. Emily made a mental note of the idea. Can we use the house's kitchen itself? Of course, said Richard. Or we could build a larger kitchen in the back of the property, specifically for that. Robert raised his hand. Can I suggest that I take care of a community garden too, to provide fresh ingredients for the classes? Robert, you're a genius, exclaimed Mrs. Elizabeth. David, who was setting up the sound system, stopped to say, you know you're planning a full community center, right? Cooking classes, garden, social assistance. And is that wrong? Asked Emily. It's perfect. It's exactly the kind of project that creates real impact in the community. When they finally sat down for dinner, Mrs. Elizabeth asked for a moment of silence. I want to thank all of you. Today wasn't just the day I left my prison. It was the day our family reunited. Mom, said Richard, may I make a toast? Of course. Richard raised his glass. I toast to Emily, who had the courage to do what was right even when it was risky. I toast to my mother, who forgave me even when I didn't deserve it. And I toast to all of you, who never stopped believing this family could be better. Cheers, everyone said in unison. During dinner, conversations flowed naturally. Mrs. Elizabeth told stories from the past. Richard talked about his plans to modernize the company. Emily shared dreams about the social projects, and the staff felt truly part of the family. You know, said Margaret at one point, I've worked in wealthy homes for over 20 years. I've never seen a family transform so quickly. It's because the love was always here, explained Mrs. Elizabeth. It just needed to be rediscovered. Mom, said Richard, can I make a confession? Of course. I missed you so much. Even when I said I was doing everything for your own good, I knew I was losing my best friend. Best friend. You've always been my confidant, my advisor. After Dad died, I felt completely orphaned. Son, you were never orphaned. I was always here, waiting for you to let me help. I know that now, and I promise I'll never face problems alone again. Emily watched the conversation with a full heart. She could see that mother and son were genuinely reconnecting, not just superficially but deeply. Mrs. Elizabeth, said Emily, can I ask a question about the projects? Of course, dear. How will we choose the families who will receive help? Good question. I thought about creating a committee with people from the community. It won't be just us deciding who deserves help. I like the idea, said Richard. It's more democratic. And more efficient, added David. Community people know local needs better. Can I suggest we include representatives of different ages on the committee, said Emily. Young people, adults and seniors have different perspectives. Emily, you're thinking like a true social manager, praised Mrs. Elizabeth. The dinner lasted for over 2 hours, and nobody wanted it to end. It was as if they were making up for all the lost moments at once. When they finally started clearing the table, Richard pulled Emily aside for a private conversation. Emily, I need to formally apologize to you. Mr. Richard, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I accused you of terrible things today. I said you were a gold digger, that you were manipulating my mother. You were protecting your family, I understand. No, Emily, I was protecting my pride. You did everything right and I did everything wrong. Emily was moved by his sincerity. Mr. Richard, good people do bad things when they're scared. That doesn't make them bad people. How can you be so wise at 28? Life taught me early on that holding on to anger only hurts ourselves. Can I ask about your family? Of course. I live with my parents and my younger siblings in the countryside. I came to New York to earn money and help them. And how will they react when they find out you've become a social worker? Emily laughed. My mother will faint with pride. She always said I was born to take care of people. Your mother is a wise woman. Mothers always are, said Emily, looking at Mrs. Elizabeth, who was chatting animatedly with Margaret about recipes. Emily, can I make a confession? Of course. When I saw my mother defending you today, I felt jealous. Jealous? I thought, she cares more about a stranger than about me. But then I understood that wasn't it. What was it then? She cares about people who care about her. You showed love for her and she returned it. I only showed control and authoritarianism. Mr. Richard, Mrs. Elizabeth loves you very much. She told me several times how much she misses you. Even after everything? Especially after everything. A mother's love never ends. Richard wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. Thank you, Emily, for everything. Thank you, Mr. Richard, for giving me the chance to be part of this family. When they returned to the group, Mrs. Elizabeth was organizing the next steps. So it's decided. Tomorrow we'll go to the City Hall to register our NGO. On Monday we start renovating the space for the community center, and on Tuesday, Emily starts the social management course. And I'll be part of everything, assured Richard. Even the cooking classes, teased Margaret. Especially the cooking classes. I need to learn how to manage in the kitchen. Everyone laughed, and Emily realized she had witnessed something extraordinary, a family reuniting and a new chapter beginning. Mrs. Elizabeth, said Emily, I have one last question. Go ahead, dear. How were you able to forgive so quickly? Mrs. Elizabeth thought for a moment before answering. Emily, at 72, I've learned that life is too short to hold grudges and too long to live without love. But what if Mr. Richard hadn't regretted it? He regretted it because I gave him the opportunity to regret. If I had reacted with anger, he would have reacted with more anger. Love generates love, Emily. Always. You are very wise. I'm not wise, dear. I'm just a woman who has made many mistakes in life and learned from them. When the evening came to an end, everyone headed to their rooms. But before that, Mrs. Elizabeth made sure to accompany Emily to her room at the back of the house. Emily, starting tomorrow, you'll move to one of the main bedrooms in the house. Mrs. Elizabeth, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You're part of the family now, and family lives in the house, not in the back. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, just accept that sometimes in life good things do happen. Emily hugged Mrs. Elizabeth tightly. Thank you for letting me take care of you. Thank you for saving me, my dear. That night, Emily took a long time to fall asleep. She kept thinking about how her life had completely changed in a single day. In the morning, she was just a cleaning lady trying to hide an act of kindness. By night, she was a social worker about to coordinate projects that would help hundreds of people. But what moved her the most wasn't the professional changes. It was knowing she had been part of something very rare, the genuine reconciliation between two people who loved each other but had lost their way. 3 months later, the community center was running at full steam. Margaret's cooking classes had a waiting list. Robert's garden supplied not only the center, but several families in the area, and Emily's social assistance program had already helped more than 50 families. Richard actively participated in everything and discovered he had a knack for teaching children about gardening. Mrs. Elizabeth moved through the center like a benevolent queen, knowing every person by name and remembering details of everyone's lives. "Emily," said Mrs. Elizabeth one afternoon while they were organizing documents, "there's something I never told you." "What is it?" "When you found me in that room, I was planning to give up on everything." Emily stopped what she was doing. "What do you mean?" "I was losing hope that things would get better. I was thinking about stopping fighting." Mrs. Elizabeth. But then an unknown young woman appeared with a bowl of soup and a kind smile, and she reminded me that there are still good people in the world. "You saved me too." "How?" "You showed me that small acts of kindness can change everything. You gave me a purpose." "So we saved each other?" "We saved an entire family," Emily corrected. That afternoon, as they watched the children playing in the community center garden, Mrs. Elizabeth and Emily reflected on how life can change quickly when people choose to care for one another. "You know, Emily, sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't entered that room." "Don't think about that, Mrs. Elizabeth. What matters is that I did, and you changed our lives forever. You changed mine too. You taught me that it's never too late to start over, and you taught me that we should never give up on the people we love." The sun was setting when Richard arrived at the center, coming straight from the office. He found his mother and Emily talking on the porch, watching the end-of-day activity. "How did things go today?" he asked, sitting down beside them. "We had 3 new families sign up for the program," Emily reported. "And we received a donation from a company that wants to replicate our model in other cities," added Mrs. Elizabeth. "You two are amazing," said Richard. "In just 3 months, we've built something that's already inspiring other people." "We built it, son, the 3 of us together." Emily smiled. It was true. What had started as a lonely act of compassion had turned into a united family, working for a common purpose. "Mom, Emily, I want to say something important." "What is it?" "I've decided to donate 20% of the company's annual earnings to our social projects." Emily's eyes widened. "Mr. Richard, that's much more than we planned. It's because our projects are doing so well that I want to expand. I want us to create centers like this in at least 5 cities in the region." Mrs. Elizabeth held her son's hand. "Richard, your father would be very proud of you. And I'm proud to have both of you by my side." End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this moving story? Do you believe Emily made the right decision by risking her job to take care of Mrs. Elizabeth? And Richard, did he truly manage to redeem himself? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. We'd love to know what you think. Don't forget to leave your like to support our channel, and most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss other touching stories like this one. Your company is very important to us.